on this episode of Jeff Does Vegas.
The funny thing is, if you ever have a strange request, don't be afraid to ask a concierge. We always enjoy the weird ones. We sell tickets for shows, tickets for tours, all day, every day. That's not exciting. But the exciting ones are the ones that you don't quite have an answer for in the moment.
Las Vegas. It's more than just a city. It's a feeling. It's that feeling of excitement when you spot the lights of the strip out the airplane window. It's that feeling of awe as you stroll down the boulevard, taking in the sights and sounds. And it's that feeling of satisfaction, knowing that you're in the greatest city in the world. Over 42 million people from around the world share that feeling every year. And I'm one of them. Taking you to the world-famous Vegas Strip and beyond, my name is Jeff. And this is Jeff Does Vegas. I love discovering new Vegas content creators and then sharing them with all of you, whether it's a new blogger, vlogger, or, as in the case of this episode, a fellow podcaster. Joining me this time around is Brian Ortega, and he's the host of the Concierge Confidential podcast. Every episode, Brian gives listeners an inside look at Las Vegas and the people who work there. He explores every aspect of the Vegas lifestyle, from hotels to restaurants to nightlife, and he even shares some awesome tips and tricks for Las Vegas visitors. Brian and I talked about his past life as a concierge at a major Las Vegas resort and some of the weird requests that he dealt with, what inspired him to launch the podcast and what he's enjoying about getting it out there, and I asked him to temporarily step back into the concierge role to share some of his favorite Vegas restaurants, shows, and more. Please enjoy my conversation with Brian Ortega from the Concierge Confidential podcast.
I've actually lived here for about 10 years now. I'm actually from Arizona. I moved here to go to school. I went to school. I got a job while I was in school. Ended up staying in Las Vegas, which I'm originally from Tucson, Arizona, which is a small town that everybody tries to get out of. And I ended up doing it, and I am one of the many transplants to the city of Las Vegas.
When you first moved to the city, was there anything that really surprised you about Vegas? I mean, it has this reputation outside of the city. I think everybody's got some preconceived notions about Las Vegas. Was there anything that really surprised you when you moved to the city?
One of the biggest things, and this was actually after I moved out of like the dorm and I was living in sort of the local area and then started working in the city, was that many people who don't work on the Strip, even people who work on the Strip, do not visit the Las Vegas Strip very often. It's actually not an alarming amount because it's what people don't want to spend a lot of money, but the amount of people who don't actually go to the Strip is quite high. A lot of people have normal jobs here. They work in, tech, or they work in, IT, certain things like that. And that was actually one of the most surprising things was the amount of people who don't like going to the Strip. And I'm one of the very few that love the whole experience of Las Vegas Boulevard. I saw Ocean's 11 when I was a kid, the new one with George Clooney. And to me, that is always what Vegas is. And I think a lot of us have that story that we saw that one movie, and that will always be the Vegas to us. And I think that's actually the best way to experience Vegas is through the eyes of how you saw Vegas the first time. But it's getting harder to do that just because of, pricing, and some old things are going away. For example, like we don't have the sands anymore. We don't have, the dunes. So we have to sort of find remnants of that era for some people.
It's funny that you talk about that whole idea of locals not liking to go to the Strip, because I visit Vegas so often. I've made a lot of friends over the years that I've been going to Vegas that live there, locals that live there. And yeah, they all tell me that they're like, unless I have to go to the Strip for work, I am not going to the Strip. So I've actually kind of made a point of getting away from the Strip myself and doing the locals things because A, for two reasons. A, it's a really, really good experience. And B, it saves their sanity because they're not having to come to the Strip to come and see
That's
me.
True. Yeah, that's right. No, it's also, I think it's important for me as somebody who talks about Vegas and goes and experiences things on the Strip to actually stay on the Strip and see what it feels like, because I stayed on the Strip when I went to go see Adele because my mom was in town. We ended up staying at Caesars, and it is not a cheap experience just because you are surrounded by slot machines all day. You're surrounded by table games, and then if you ever want to do something, like if you're going to sit at a bar, you're going to spend money to drink. So I think it's important to, as a local Vegas content creator, I suppose, is to experience what, tourists feel, because I can just, go have, somewhat expensive dinner and then come home. And that's, the only cost that I have to take into account. So yeah, I'm always asked, like, what is there to do in town? And yeah, many locals also don't know how to it's even just getting around the Las Vegas Strip right now, especially because we have F1 going on during this podcast, or getting it built up. And just getting around the Strip is so much of a headache, and I can see why somebody wouldn't want to go there. There's parts of the Strip that I don't go to right now just because of the accessibility of it. So it's an important factor for sure.
You mentioned moving to Las Vegas to go to school and go to university. I creeped your LinkedIn bio, and I see you went to UNLV. Broadcast journalism, was that something that you always wanted to do? I mean, I know for me, getting into the world of radio, I knew from like the time I was a kid, I wanted to work in radio. Was it something similar for yourself?
Yeah, for me, I had been I'd always loved sports, and I always wanted to work in sports media. So I wanted to be a sort of like a Joe Buck or like an Al Michaels broadcaster, or like a guy on SportsCenter, because that's when SportsCenter was huge. And then I just sort of kept on with it in high school, and that's what I really wanted to do. That's what I wanted to get my major in. And yeah, it's always been something I've wanted to do. And then when I went to UNLV, I took obviously my broadcasting classes, but I also found that we have a world-class hospitality school, and I needed some outside areas of study. So that's where I actually started taking some hospitality classes, which are actually very, very interesting. They're very common sense, I have to say, but it's a lot of like accounting, because I dated a girl who was actually in the hospitality program, and I found out it's really just accounting. If you're going to get a degree in hospitality, you're just doing accounting, but with, bed sheets instead of regular numbers sometimes. But yeah.
And so, I mean, outside of your current podcast, which we are going to get to in a bit here, your broadcast journalism stuff, you're involved in media to a degree in Vegas right now?
Yeah, so right now I'm a producer for a company called DraftKings. You may have heard of it. And we do sports betting TV. So I work for a company called VSiN, and they were the first specific sports betting radio format, and then they also do TV. They're on YouTube TV, so on and so forth. And we do sports betting television, which is very interesting, especially during football season. It's always very busy. So this is a fun way to sort of break it up. But I did end up going into the broadcast field, but that was after working as a concierge for many, many years, because I found out that TV doesn't actually pay very good unless you start getting into, like the private sector, local news doesn't pay very well. So I actually just kept being a concierge for a while, and then kind of went from there.
I've seen the VSiN studios in Circa. That's such a cool environment. That's so amazing.
Yeah, you're definitely around it all the time. You always know what sports are going on, what sports are coming up. I actually don't like to watch a lot of sports television when I'm actually not at work. So my dad will call me and say, "Did you see this on SportsCenter?" And it's like, well, it's my day off, so I tried not to actually watch sports that day. But you keep up to date. But it's really a great experience, and I think Circa is actually one of the lone properties that centered its casino around its sports book, which if you walk around town nowadays, you don't really see that very often.
I would imagine the novelty of working at a studio located in Circa wears off after a while. And the only reason I say this is because I spent several years working at a radio station in West Edmonton Mall in Edmonton, Canada. Mm-hmm. And West Edmonton Mall is, for those that aren't familiar, it's one of the biggest shopping malls in the world. For a while, it was the biggest shopping mall in the world. It's got a water park. It's got an amusement park. It's got in true Canadian fashion, it's got an ice rink in the center ice that back in the 80s and early 90s, the Edmonton Oilers used to practice at on a regular basis. And our studios, we had the storefront studios in the mall, and it was so awesome when I started working there, and I loved it. And inside of a month, I hated every minute of it.
Yes, it happens all the time. Yeah, I get it. No, yeah, because you're basically in a bubble. So I actually take to it just fine. It does wear off that you're like in a studio in a casino, but I have a lot of coworkers that don't enjoy being in the fishbowl. But it's okay. It's all good. But yeah, I get it.
So you mentioned spending a lot of time working as a concierge, which is interesting to me for a lot of different reasons. And I want to talk to you about that. First, For those who maybe aren't 100% familiar, what is a concierge and what does a concierge do? I mean, I have a pretty good idea in my head, but I have a sneaky suspicion you're going to clarify it for me.
Certainly. So the word concierge gets actually used a lot now. It's actually used a lot in like the medical field, and it's not exactly the same, but it's like, oh, this is like your medical concierge, where they're actually there to do all these things. So it gets used a lot of ways, but in the true sense of the word for hotels is that we are the keeper of the keys. That's kind of like the old explanation of it, where you were the keeper of the keys of the castle. And I would say that's sort of our job. We're sort of the Swiss Army knife of the hotel, where we know a lot of information about, things of our own hotel, things of the city itself. Typically, if you're a good concierge, you're versed in a lot of different types of cuisine, a lot of different types of culture. If you could speak multiple languages is great, because all it is enhancing the experience of the guest. And we're really there to do all the things that you may not want to do yourself, which maybe the internet might help you with nowadays, but we're there to give you that human touch. And that was always the thing that I really wanted to really accentuate when I was working as a concierge, was that I would give you the personal feel of a show or a restaurant, what it feels like. Because a lot of times you can go online, read a review, and it helps and you can see pictures, but it really helps if you have somebody who's been there, has, done the thing that you're trying to do. And it's also about crafting experiences, and that's really what a good concierge in hotels does now. So hotels, for example, like the Wynn, the Encore, MGM Grand, the Skylofts, Mandalay Bay, they all have concierge. But there are certain hotels in the Strip that no longer have that type of concierge. Nowadays, you hear concierge in a hotel on the Strip, and all they do is sell tickets and tours, and that's all they do. But a real concierge, a real concierge really knows how to enhance the experience by doing, flower arrangements because it's an anniversary or something. Or if you call in and say, I want to do this with my wife, it's our 35th anniversary, what can we do? And then from there, a good concierge never should have like a stock answer. It should always be, I always say you should ask 3 questions before you figure out what this person wants, because somebody may not want to go out to a bar because they may not drink. So it's the personal touch of the hotel. And I think that is my favorite part about being a concierge, was adding to those experiences. So really, it's a person who is, again, the Swiss Army knife of the hotel that can give you recommendations, personal touch, at your fingertips.
It feels like the way things have gone and the way things are going in Vegas, and we'll get to that more so in depth in a bit, but it does feel like that personal touch has really disappeared. As you say, the concierge desk now at a lot of the hotels seems to have been taken over by people selling, quote unquote, or giving away, quote unquote, tickets and tours, which usually involves you getting sucked in or looped into some sort of timeshare presentation. And it really does feel, like you say, like that personal touch has gone away.
Yeah, and I definitely say, we even have kiosks now that check you in, which is great, like if you don't really want anything extra, but people always say, well, I wasn't able to do this, I wasn't able to do that, and it's the first question I would ask is, did you talk to a human being? Which I know can sometimes be difficult, but I always tell people, even though we get long lines, and I see the long lines all the time for the check-in desk, try to check in with the front desk, with an agent, because that person can actually listen to your experience and say, oh, well, it's your anniversary, maybe I can do this for you. Maybe I can put you on a higher floor, maybe a better view. It's not guaranteed. There's ways to get those things, obviously. But checking in, working with an actual person goes a whole lot. And I agree that a lot of, especially after COVID, a lot of the personal touch has kind of gone away. A lot of the freebies that we used to give out have also gone away. And it's always works in sort of phases. So it was sort of like the laissez-faire, do what you want as like a host or a concierge, right up until, I would say, the 2008 recession, and then we had to tighten our belts, and then we had COVID, which also made them tighten their belts even more. So we use these points sort of in history for Vegas to sort of recalibrate and change. So sometimes for good and maybe sometimes not for good.
You bring up you mentioned hosts, and so let's talk just briefly then about the difference between what a concierge does versus what a casino host does.
Yeah, so I actually, before I left being a concierge, I actually wanted to be a host because I felt I actually as another job I did, I was teaching people how to play blackjack and craps at a Marriott in town, and I know a lot of the the games, and also just being a gambler myself, being around other gamblers and knowing what their, needs are. And also, parlaying that in with being a concierge and dealing with people on a face-to-face basis is, I thought I could do that. So I thought I could actually put that all together. And casino hosts, essentially, they are people who take care of somewhat VIP guests. They're guests that come into town that are here specifically to gamble. And it's really changed. It used to be really the upper echelon person who would come in, betting $500,000 hands. Nowadays, we actually get a lot of people that are slot players, and they actually just have a lot of slot points because of MLife and Caesars Rewards. We have a lot more casino hosts that deal with that, and then we have executive casino hosts who deal with, the whales, if you will. So those people are the ones that are arranging these, the trips to come to Vegas, the rooms. They have a much larger pool to choose from. So they're part of like the marketing team, and they're the ones that give you, that have the power to give you free rooms, free shows. Sometimes they'll do promotional sort of tickets. So you come into town and they'll have like U2 as an example. They'll have U2 playing, but just for, high level MGM guests. They're the ones who arrange that. They're the ones that actually track and see how much you're spending. So really, they are like a concierge just for you. I'm kind of like the concierge for everybody else, basically, at that point.
So how long then did you work as a concierge, and can you tell us where you worked as a concierge?
Yeah, sure. So it was always going to be like a secret thing, but I've said it a couple of times. So I used to work at MGM Grand, which is the big green monster, as we called it. And we had, I think, the second largest concierge team. We had about, I want to say we had about 40 concierge, and I think the only one bigger was the Venetian Palazzo, which is obviously two properties put together. But yeah, I worked there about 4 years, and then COVID happened, and then obviously everybody basically got laid off. It was a very, very surreal experience. When we were able to start coming back, they did ask me to come back, but I had already started my new job, and I felt like this was a good pivot to sort of get out of the hotel business, just because sometimes you get stuck there. That happens. We have a lot of concierge that end up being there for a long time, because really the difference between concierge and like front desk agents tend to be, especially like breaking into the hotel business, in their 20s, late 20s into the early 30s. And then you also get concierge who maybe break in their 30s, 20s or 30s, and they make it a career, because you really can make being a concierge a career, because it's actually a pretty nice salary, and you also get commissions on top of that. So you can kind of get stuck unless you want to move up and become a manager, or move to the front, the other front of the house, the front desk, or become a casino host or marketing. So I felt it was going to take a long time to get to the track I wanted, so I decided to make the pivot and go to get a job in where I actually got my degree in. So my mom was very happy about that.
And it's always important to make mom happy.
That's
That
right.
is the most important part of the whole thing.
Yeah, that's right. So I did learn something more than just using Brussels sprouts capitalized, which I always make that joke from what I learned in college.
I would imagine you probably had some strange requests, some weird questions.
Yeah.
What were some of the more bizarre requests that you'd get as a concierge?
So the funny thing is, if you ever have a strange request, don't be afraid to ask a concierge. We always enjoy the weird ones. We sell tickets for shows, tickets for tours, all day, every day. That's not exciting. But the exciting ones are the ones that you don't quite have an answer for in the moment. So one that I remembered, so I wanted to remember, I tell it quite a bit, is that I actually had somebody ask for a little person for a birthday. So this person walked up. It was Friday. They wanted the little person for Saturday. So they had spoken to another concierge about it, but that person wasn't there, so I got stuck with it. And one of the key things is we don't want to say no. So we always, we try not to say no. So I called my manager, because this was a very interesting one, and then they said, well, we work with this company that does these interesting requests, and we also have we have two people we can call. One of them was way too expensive, because we would have had to flown the performers in from Washington. It would have been like $2,000. So we decided not to do that one. But we do work with a company called Las Vegas Events, and they actually have a number for an agent for a little person, and we were able to get in contact with them. I was able to call them, and then we started with a price. And then I was like, perfect, I found a little person for this price. I told the guests, and then we had to start negotiating. So it found out to be a negotiation. So we were able to end up fulfilling the request by, we booked the little person for $550 for 30 minutes of work to bring out a cake and sing happy birthday at the pool. So it was quite an experience to do all that in such a short amount of time. I have one more quick one if you'd like, and it's sort of, it starts off kind of like R-rated, but it actually turns into a very nice little story. So we actually had a guest. This was just sort of the in the office. So this wasn't one specifically for me, but it was sort of a team effort where we had a guest where she was actually getting married that weekend, and she had breast cancer. So she actually had a double mastectomy and then had implants put in, and she told us that she actually forgot her nipples on her way to Las Vegas. Or at so we ended up actually trying to figure this out. We found a costume shop that actually had nipples, and but they didn't have glue. They didn't have like human adhesive, and she really wanted to have all this for her wedding night, for her honeymoon. So we actually ended up calling Ka, which is our Cirque du Soleil show, and said, "Do you have like glue that can go on, like a body?" And they said, "Yeah, we also have nipples. Do you want both of those?" And then we're like, yes, of course. So we actually ended up fulfilling this entire request in less than 48 hours. So we were very excited as a team to make this woman's night very, very special. So that was one of more interesting requests for sure.
I think those are both high points that should appear in your LinkedIn profile, quite frankly. Able to source a little person for a birthday party and nipples for a wedding night. Yeah. I think that's
Thanks. Yeah, no, it was definitely an undertaking, but I'll definitely say that every time I work in an interview that I can think on my feet, which that's a lot of what the job is just thinking on your feet and doing it with style. That's the biggest thing, is you make sure you got to do it with style.
That's amazing. Yeah. I want to talk about the podcast. This is such a fun podcast to listen to, the Concierge Confidential podcast. What was it that inspired you to take that step and launch a podcast? It can be a very a big undertaking, and it can be a little bit intimidating to go out, and it's sort of that feeling of, do I want to put myself out there like this? What was it that made you take that step?
Definitely. So I found that working in the hotel industry, we have a lot of these stories. And then when you go out and work a regular job, and being in TV, I guess, counts as a regular job now, is a lot of people don't have these experiences. And I would find myself, telling these stories to all the people in the control room, and they thought they were fun, or they thought they were funny. So I thought this would be something that and I've always loved educating people on things that I know that I'd really love them to know. So I found that this was a good idea. I actually had been, producing some podcasts at my job that I work at now, and found that it actually wasn't that hard. So you just need a microphone, you need, an editing system, which I already had, and then obviously being able to, talk. So obviously, it takes more than that. I found out once I started putting it together. You need a host system. You need to be able to deliver it. Good sound quality is a very important thing, and it's not just having a regular microphone. I went through several iterations of microphones, and I finally ended up on the Shure M7, I believe, and it does deliver great audio. But yeah, so I ended up starting the podcast and launching it, and I found that just starting it is what you have to do. Just start recording. It may not sound great the first couple, but just always trying to get better was a big deal. So I started doing the pod. I try to have guests, and I'm trying to do more guests, but I find it's hard with my schedule and other people's schedules to sort of coordinate, and I try to put one out every week. That's sort of like the goal. I try to put out, one or two a week, and the first one, which is usually out on Tuesdays, I try to do preparation stuff for people who come to Vegas. So what to expect, what to bring, things that are going on in town. That's what I like to do with the first one. And the second one I call Last Night in Vegas, which is on the same feed. And that one's more about my experience going and reviewing like a restaurant or a lounge or an experience, just to give you sort of a different flavor. And I really try to do both. And I ended up coming up with the idea of having an also video platform. So I ended up doing that on Instagram and TikTok. I found that I never played with TikTok before. It was the most annoying thing. I was like, how do I do any of this? and now I'm on there, so it's a thing. But I found it was a really cool way of promoting the podcast, but also giving you the video version of the podcast while, because people are very visual. So it's much easier to show food than to talk about food sometimes. But I just really like educating people, and that's one of my favorite things. So it's like an outlet for what I've done in the city.
It's a big undertaking to do a weekly podcast. It really, I know even myself, I mean, I'm coming up on 5 years that I've been doing this podcast now, and I've managed to, this year for 2023, I think I've missed 1 week where I haven't put out content. But it's such a huge undertaking to do. So I commend you for going into this just guns a-blazing, so to speak, and saying, yep, I'm going to do 1, sometimes 2 a week, and I'm going to get this content out. I think that's amazing. I think it's awesome.
I appreciate it. Yeah. But no, doing interviews, definitely I'm learning that you have to sort of space it out because you have to work with people's schedules. So we're working on it. So I think it also brings a lot more when you do have, other professionals on. Like I've had a friend who's a bartender on and explaining her stories of being a bartender. I have a coworker who he used to be a valet parker at Caesars back in the good old days of like the late 90s and early 2000s. He says he parked Michael Jackson's car. There's a lot of those stories, so you always have to shift through the ones you might believe. But those are always good stories. So I think Vegas is great because everybody has a story like that works on the Strip or around the Strip. And it's one of those very interesting cities that it's not like LA where it's normal to see them walking around, but it's also normal to see them walking around, and it's just fun to see them having fun. But yeah, it's an undertaking, but just getting it out there is a big deal.
Something I found with mine is I know like a portion of my podcast is doing trip reports. Mm-hmm. And when I come to Vegas, and I'll usually throw together a trip report episode after and review all the restaurants and hotels and shows and things like that. But something it's really done is it's forced me to step out of my comfort zone, because when you travel somewhere so often, you get those regular places and those usual haunts, and you find yourself going to the same places over and over again. Have you found for yours that you've kind of had to do that same thing and step out and do different things? So it's like, oh, I'm not doing another episode about the flamingo again.
Exactly. Yeah, no, it's actually been the hardest part because I know what I like. I know what I'm going to enjoy when I go out. I usually go out once a week to do these, just to sort of, keep the budget down because it can get very expensive. But also just trying to try something new, but also have a good time out in town. But yeah, I've actually tried different foods that I never thought I'd try. Like I went to the Aria and I tried Bardot, which is a French brasserie. I think I got it right. And I tried escargot for the first time because I had had steak so many times. I had had so much of the same foods that I said, I need to try something different. And I tried escargot, and I found out that I actually enjoyed it. It actually wasn't bad. So it is actually a really good way of pushing you outside of your comfort zone for sure. There's still things that I have trouble sort of, coming to terms with. Like me and sushi don't always get along, so I don't like sushi. But I found that I actually really enjoy Japanese cuisine, which is very odd. So I find that doing this actually does help me be much more open to different cuisines, which I think there's actually cuisines that are coming into town that are really becoming trendy that I think are definitely going to take over. And there's certain things that I think that are going to come to town pretty soon for the masses.
One of your recent episodes I listened to talking about trends, you talked about the Mediterranean restaurants that seem to be just blowing up in Las Vegas right now. And it's weird how Vegas goes through those trends, right? And it's whatever, I guess, hence it's trendy. Yeah. Whatever's trendy and whatever's big and popular seems to just roll into Vegas like a force of nature and take over every property on the Strip. And then 6 months or a year from now, some of that stuff seems to all sort of go away.
No, it's so true. Yeah, no, it's crazy. It was like there was like one Mediterranean restaurant on the Strip for the longest time when I was working as a concierge in 2018, 2019, and we had a Mediterranean restaurant. It was called the Greek Sneak, or so it's Greek, and it was like one of the only places on the Strip. And now at the Venetian, the Venetian has like 3 Mediterranean restaurants all within like 50 feet of each other. They have one which is called Fleur Azul, which is like not my thing. I went there and I tried it out and I wasn't a fan of it. But some people love it. It's big for like bachelorette parties. It has live music. They wave like the handkerchiefs and it's cool, but it's very, very expensive. They also have Ha Salong, which is actually just below it, which is a very high-end Mediterranean cuisine that just opened maybe a couple weeks ago. And that place has huge buzz around it. And they even have Mazan, which I believe is it's sort of like a stand, which is also Mediterranean cuisine. And then they also have Milo's, which is a really well-known Mediterranean restaurant at the Venetian. So it's hard for all of them to compete with each other for sure. Like I'm sure that one of them will close at some point, probably Fleur Lasoul. But you just see them everywhere. And I think I said it in the episode that I think a lot of that cuisine, I mean, even Cathedral, which is over at the Aria, that one's actually a very beautiful restaurant. I actually had gone there for the grand opening. I knew a nightclub host who invited me to go. I was able to go. And the cuisine itself is said to be Mediterranean, Italian, a lot of very European flavors. But anyways, I believe that the reason they're becoming so popular is because a lot of Americans are trying to be much more health conscious. They know they also just want to try something different. And I think Mediterranean cuisine is a way to do that. A lot of vegan, a lot of vegetarian options in Mediterranean cuisine. So I think that has a lot of legs. But I think Vegas is very, very trendy. Like one of my favorite things that came to Vegas was supper clubs. That is actually like just a recycle of like the 1950s and 60s where you had all of these shows, dinner shows that they like those now because it's so expensive to actually go to a show nowadays in Vegas and dinner that why don't we just put them together? So Mayfair brought that back when I was still working in the hotels. And now Delilah's, which is actually, I believe, from New York and then LA, and now they have it here in Las Vegas. And I think those are actually one of the better trends that are coming to Vegas. And they're not coming so fast because it takes a lot to conceptualize it. But things like speakeasies, I used to love to go to speakeasies. But oh my God, there's so many now that it's actually not even fun. It's not fun finding one anymore. It is what it is. But that's a trend that I think is on its way out. But I think we're just oversaturated in the market of speakeasies.
It feels like you can't turn around now or go into any hotel or see any kind of TikTok video or Instagram reel or anything that isn't check out this new speakeasy that's opening, blah, blah, blah. The whole concept behind the speakeasy originally was that it was a secret that hardly anybody knew about. And now, I mean, I get it. Clearly that's a bad business model in Las Vegas. You don't want an establishment that nobody knows about. But at the same time, it's not a cool speakeasy if everybody and their dog knows about it.
I always say that everyone always says the barbershop is better. So I did one that actually I think has like some of my most views on TikTok was the Ghost Donkey, which is at Cosmopolitan, which is actually great. Love Ghost Donkey. It's a fantastic speakeasy because it's small. Nobody really knows where it's at. But everyone always in the comments says, well, I think barbershop is better, which barbershop is downstairs. Everyone knows that that's a bar. Like, it's not a secret. So I never count that as a speakeasy, and everybody says it. All the Vegas influencers are, this is the best one. It's just a bar, so it doesn't really count as a speakeasy. But I agree. It should be hard to find, which, again, like you said, should be the point. But it's one of those things where it's very trendy, and I think and I used to work for MGM Resorts, but whenever MGM does something in a whole, it always is very corporatized. And I don't really, which is it's the business. But for example, Easy Speakeasy, which is at the Aria, is all over social media, and it's probably because I follow them on social media. But they're all over the place. I don't really like the room, but at that point, it just feels very corporatized. It feels very done up. It feels like somebody touched it from the executive office, and that's not fun. You want it to be organic, like I think Ghost Donkey is, which is why I think it's superior.
Speakeasy by committee is a terrible idea.
Oh, it's horrible. It's like I don't like it to be so done up. I don't like reservations for speakeasies because then that makes it feel like a restaurant. I want it to be something you walk in, very jazzy, if you will. You walk in, you have a drink or two, and then you walk out. You're not going to be there for super, super long. But I don't know. That's just my personal take on it.
I'm also a big fan, like yourself, of the supper club.
Yeah.
I love that supper club concept. And last year, my wife and I had the opportunity to go to Mayfair Supper Club in
Yeah.
the Bellagio. We had a friend of ours that actually performs there, so we were able to go
very
and
cool.
see her and check it out on the Sunday night jazz night. And afterwards, when I was telling people the cost and what we paid for our night, with a tip, it was a $400
Oh, yeah.
night out. And people were like, "Oh my God, that's so much money." And I said, "Well, really, when you think about it, it's not, because we had dinner. We had an amazing dinner, one of the most incredible dinners I've ever had in my life, and we had a show.
Exactly.
And if we had gone out for dinner somewhere to a equivalent level steakhouse, and then bought a pair of tickets to a Cirque du Soleil show, whether that be Ka or O or one of the big Cirque shows, we would have spent $400 anyways.
Oh, yeah, easy.
And so I much rather would have had that experience. I have less problem paying $400 for that experience than I do paying the $30 for the 2 Starbucks coffees and 2 pastries that my wife and I get stuck having in the morning,
Definitely.
right?
Oh, I totally get that, because you go in knowing that it's an experience. Like, you know that you're going in, and getting the show aspect of it is a huge part of it, because they sing so well. I was actually there on Wednesday or Tuesday. Monday. I forget which day I was there, but I was there a couple days ago, and it's great. I actually will just go and have a drink, or like I was able to go. It was Monday because I was watching the Monday Night Football game, and I was across the street, and I said, I want to go check it out because I'm here, and I just had a drink, and I ended up getting a dessert, and it was awesome. And again, it's much easier for me, like you said, to spend that amount of money for, a cake and a couple drinks than to spend, $30 for a Starbucks coffee, which it's exuberant a lot of the time. So you pick your spots, definitely.
I want to talk a little bit about Las Vegas now and some of the changes that people have seen and things that have happened over the last little while. You've been in Vegas for a long time. What are some of the biggest changes that you've noticed over the last few years?
The nickel and diming is the thing that you get a lot of people, paying for parking or any of the fees. You get a lot on the restaurants. But I would say that Vegas is becoming much more of, it's no longer a budget city. A lot of people came to, their old ideas of Vegas. It's no longer here. You should understand that Vegas is very expensive to visit, for sure. And really make Vegas what you want it to be. You don't have to do all like the big nightclubs and everything. But in terms of how it's changed, I would say that a lot more stuff is much more automated now. It's a lot more, color by numbers, I suppose, is that we get in a guest. It's a lot of convention crowds, but you don't get that service. You can get that service if you pay for it. A lot of it has to come with, the price included, but it's a hard one to answer in sort of like a macro sense. But I mean, I could tell you some little things that are changing how restaurants look, but I would definitely say that you get a lot of people who wish for the old days, but you have to look towards the future. So no more buffets, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's the biggest thing that I think I've noticed. I mean, I've been going to Vegas pretty regularly for 8-9 years now coming up. And the cost is definitely the big thing. Yeah. That has skyrocketed. I know I did a trip back in March. I was there for a convention, and my wife joined me for the first little bit as kind of a vacation. And I would say, setting aside having dinner at Mayfair, I would say it was probably the most expensive trip that we've ever had to Las Vegas. And it was things like, we went out for breakfast one morning. We went to the Henry and the Cosmo, and it was a $50 breakfast. And I mean, that I was blown away by the $6 cup of coffee and the $6 cup of tea. Not anything fancy, like just a straight cup of coffee and a straight cup of tea was $6 for each of us. And so, I mean, that was certainly a huge thing for us. And just as you say, that you mentioned the nickel and diming, and it feels like, again, resort fees have gone up and there's parking fees everywhere. And you have to, when you get your check at the end of the night, you have to go over it line by line to see if they've added on some weird concession and franchise fee or some weird employee fee, or if they've already put the tip in but then given you a line for a tip. We've run into that as well. So that was kind of the big thing that I found, is just that nickel and diming. And yes, expensive, as you say, Vegas Vegas used to be a cheap weekend getaway, an easy way to get away and spend a few bucks and have a budget vacation, and it is not that anymore.
No, and I think Vegas knows what it wants to be now at this point. It wants to be a higher end vacation destination where they're really getting, the top of the price point. And it's tough. So there's places like Harrah's and Flamingo that can cater to, people who want to be here on a budget. But even those places, it can get very, very expensive to be in there. Because, they have a Gordon Ramsay restaurant at, I believe, Harrah's now. So it's tough. I think it's definitely tough. The cost is definitely a thing. But I go back to what you're saying about like the coffee and soda. Because sometimes I'll just get a soda someplace and it's, $5-6. And yeah, you get refills. But those are the exorbitant costs that you don't really see built in. And like when people ask, like, how do I go out every week to go eat at some of these places? I go with a budget. I try to spend between $100 and $30. I'm not trying to spend it, but that's realistically what's going to happen. So that's sort of the budget I want to stay in, just because that's what I think a normal night out in Vegas for people is going to end up being. Especially if you have two people, it's going to be, if it's two people, it's actually more cost effective to dine with two people sometimes than it is by yourself. Because what I'm seeing a lot of in Las Vegas in terms of, trends for restaurants and such is that you don't get a lot of like steak restaurants where it's just a single entree for yourself. It's really served to be with multiple people. So if you go with two people, you can get, an entree, a side, and then you can split it all. So everything at this point is being family style. And I think the restaurants are actually capitalizing on that by saying, well, you're going to get multiple things and you don't really know, how big the portions are. But if you go out enough like I do, you know that if you get one thing of mashed potatoes, that can feed up to 3 people. It's huge. Yeah. But I was just looking, I wanted to go to STK the other day just because I hadn't been there in a while. And then I actually will go through the menu. And I think this is a good tip for anybody who's going to dine out, especially for expensive restaurants, is to just do the math in your head or just add it up how much it's going to cost. What are you going to get? What's your date going to get? What sides are you going to get? Are you going to get drinks? And honestly, if you're going to get drinks and an entree, so I was looking just to sort of go through it. I was going to get, the New York strip, which was $75. And then at that point, if I want to get a side, all the sides are $20. So at that point, I'm almost at $100 and I haven't even had a drink yet. And then I might want to get a dessert. So at that point, I'm at $150. And that's, what I'm adding up just then. And sometimes when I go out, I have 2 drinks. So it's just, and I decided not going. I was like, no, I'm not going to spend $200 on a night out that was on a whim. So it's gotten very expensive to dine out in Vegas. So another like trend that I've seen in Vegas, the way they've been constructing restaurants, is a much more closed sort of setup, because it used to be open concept where you can see it from the casino. But now a lot of places are really building with walls so you can't see in, which I think is actually cool, because then they get to sort of create whatever they want inside of the hotel or inside of the restaurant, which is great. Like Stanton Social did this. It used to be called something else that was owned by the nightclub. And Stanton Social is enclosed. It feels sort of like a carnival, but they're able to do all these different things on the inside that really transport you. And I think you're going to see a lot of that in town, where they're building restaurants where you can't see in, which helps them sort of control a lot of the stuff that goes on the inside.
So I want you to put your concierge hat on and play concierge for me for a little bit and get a few tips and tricks for Vegas folks that might happen to be going. Let's start with restaurants and some recommendations. Top 3 recommendations. We'll go with a high end, a mid range, and a budget type place.
For sure. So I'm going to start with the hardest one first, which is the budget, because that was the one that I really had to think about. So in terms of budget, I really, really enjoy Gordon Ramsay's fish and chips over at his. It's just the stand over in the Link promenade, and it's just the fish and chips. They also do like lobster. They do shrimp as well, but it's around $20, $25. So it's like $25 if you get a drink. But that's basically what, to me, budget is on the Las Vegas Strip, because it's going to be really hard to find anything less than that. But I found it actually to be a substantial portion of like fish, really good amount of chips, fries, and it's actually delicious. And it's all cooked fresh in front of you, which is great. And it really always adds to sort of that English vibe that it's sort of served how it is. So I really enjoy Gordon Ramsay's fish and chips. I also, if you don't like fish, I also like the Side Betty Bar, which is actually over at the Park MGM, right next to the sports book. And they make great cheeseburgers. I love their smashed cheeseburgers. They're always delicious. It always hits the spot. That place can actually get very expensive if you order a cheeseburger, fries, and a soda. It ends up being like almost $40. But if you just get it's crazy. It's one of those nickel and dime things. Like, why don't you just do the cheeseburger and fries as a combo and then, cut it in half? But anyways, the cheeseburger itself is delicious, which is around $20 as well, which, again, it's expensive for a regular cheeseburger, but for Vegas, that's kind of what the going rate is for a cheeseburger on the Strip. What else did we talk about? Mid-range. Mid-range was interesting. So mid-range, I had to sort of try to figure out sort of price points. So I have two options. So Holstein's, which was still on burgers, Holstein's is one of my favorite burger places. So when someone says, I want to have a good lunch, something that's, relaxed and chill, you want something a little bit more approachable, I always recommend Holstein's. It's a good vibe. It's way better than another burger place that I'm going to talk about later. But I really, really enjoy Holstein's shakes and buns. They make really, really delicious shakes. I had never gotten a shake from there before. Again, pushing me outside of my comfort zone. I made sure to try a shake there. And they were really good. So if you go there, a burger, fries, and a soda, you're looking around $30. And again, it's a sit-down plated burger, and it definitely feels like, a high-end burger. They have much more expensive burgers there, but unless you really want to get the gold standard, which is $60, I don't think you need to. So one more, just so we have a restaurant that is not, a burger. I actually just went there, and it's called Red 8, which is Chinese cuisine at the Wynn. And even though it looks very fancy on the inside, which it is, it's actually very approachable. I was able to have I had I had crab puffs there. I also had like a pork platter that had 3 different types of like barbecue pork, duck, and then I think it was also more duck. And then I also had like orange chicken and rice, and it ended up being like $75. So and it was a lot of choices and options to choose from. So that's why I think that was actually a good value, just because I got so much. I actually had food to take home with me after. So I thought that place was good. And I think that's a good mid-range, because you can sort of make it as expensive as you want or make it as, affordable as you want for that place. And then I have high-end, which is my favorite. So high-end, probably my favorite restaurant in all of Las Vegas is Wakuda Japanese cuisine, which is at the Palazzo. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable on the inside. It's, this beautiful purple. I always tell people it's a very sexy restaurant because it has all these really cool paintings on it. They're actually all hand-penciled or hand-penned. They have delicious cocktails. They also have a speakeasy, omasake room, which is actually just like a sushi bar, and they do an omasake menu. They also have their own bar as well, like for cocktails. They have a beautiful lounge, and their sushi looks beautiful. Everything that's presented at Wakuda just looks like art, which I think is what really constitutes like high-end dining. And I really enjoy everything. Every time I've gone there, I really enjoy it. So I love Wakuda. It's, I believe, a Michelin star chef is the person who came up with the concept. So they always have to say in Vegas, this is sort of like a little fun insight, is that they always say that they have a Michelin star chef or like a 2-star Michelin chef at this restaurant. Because I found out that Las Vegas actually doesn't pay for the Michelin guidebooks. So they haven't done that, I believe, since 2010 or 11. So we don't have any new Michelin star restaurants unless you're Joe Robuchon, who's had your Michelin star since like 2000. So that's a fun little fact that I learned about Michelin stars in Vegas. But so that's Wakuda. And then obviously Delilah's, just for the vibe, I always say is it's a great high-end restaurant if you can get in, just because it does feel very money inside of the Wynn. So those are all my recommendations. Hopefully they were helpful. I know I'm kind of long-winded, but I like being descriptive. So like when I talk about Wakuda, that's how I used to sell restaurants. I always used to give off the vibe. It's like it's a very sexy restaurant, or this is a very elegant restaurant. A lot of it is how do you sell the vibe, and that's the key.
Well, I did tell you to put your concierge hat on for this, so you're forgiven. After I go for a bite to eat, I maybe want to go take in a show. Let's talk show recommendations again. Let's go kind of a top three. We'll do a residency, a production show, and then it's always fun for a little comedy or a little magic or to combine the two.
Yeah, definitely. So in terms of residencies, I mean, I went to go see Adele. I actually saw Adele twice. Once with a friend and once with my mom because I was able to get into the pool to get it. It was really hard to get tickets for Adele when she first came out. I'm assuming it's getting easier and easier to get tickets for Adele as she becomes more established. I've heard that she's going to end up extending her residency as well. But I really enjoy Adele, especially if you want a very elevated experience, a very like very Ocean's 11 Las Vegas. Adele is a great choice. The sound is awesome. The screen was state of the art until he built the Sphere, and now you have to deal with the Sphere. But Adele's great, but it's not for everybody just because she does sing, a lot of ballads. So if you're in the mood for a chill night, I think Adele certainly has its place. But I also wanted to give more of an upbeat one. So Katy Perry is super popular. I think her residency is actually ending, so I kind of feel bad putting it on the list. But every time people have gone to see Katy Perry, they've loved it. They said this is exactly what I was looking for a Vegas show. So Katy Perry is a fantastic residency. But Usher is also great. So since I'm recommending one that is leaving, I'll recommend one that is still here. Usher, people love Usher. It's R&B. He's a very, very good performer. So I would say Usher's a great choice. In terms of production show, there's so many. But I mean, the overarching answer always essentially is Absinthe. Absinthe, I think, is the best Vegas show if you like vulgarity. If you don't like vulgarity, then don't go see Absinthe. But Absinthe really is the anti-Cirque du Soleil. It has in a big top. They also have a speakeasy next to it, but theirs is actually kind of cool. And it actually has its own entrance. If you go to the, I think, Pier 66, it's something like that. It's called Pier something. And they actually have a speakeasy next to Absinthe, which acts as its own entrance, which looks like a old British phone booth. But anyways, Absinthe is fantastic. They have the Gazillionaire, who does a great job sort of pushing the show forward. But I really enjoy Absinthe. I always have a good time going. It's very expensive in terms of a daily production show. I think their tickets, start around $125, $150, and they go up from there. But Absinthe's great. I also like Vegas to show for people who like that old school Vegas vibe. It's a little bit more affordable, but I love production shows in terms of musicals, and that's really what Vegas to show is. And in terms of like Cirque du Soleil, everybody can always say but I think Ka is actually great in terms of value, just because you get the same sort of over-the-top big Vegas show that you can only see in Las Vegas, but for like a fraction of the price of what O is, because O usually starts around $150, $175. Ka you can usually get around 85 to $100 as the cheapest ticket, and it goes all the way up to $250 because we have all those seats that are $250. What do I have here left? Comedy, yeah. So I haven't actually been to comedy or magic shows in a while, but Brad Garrett was always great. They've actually moved his theater. His theater actually used to be in the basement of MGM Grand. Now he's moving on up, so now he's actually on the second floor where the district is. And I actually went and sat at the bar. I actually went to go see inside of the comedy club itself, and it really, really has upgraded itself. And I think that's a great comedy club. Obviously, you have the Jimmy Kimmel Comedy Club, which is really great, that's really cool because they actually have midday shows, like later afternoon shows. And I think that's a really great option. But also, of course, in terms of magic, because I haven't seen a magic show in quite some time, but when I was, around, Matt Franco was probably the best magic show in town. He's won best magic show for the Southern, what is it, SNCCA? Yeah, that's the SNHCA. That's the local concierge group, and they have a gala, and he wins every single year because everyone's over David Copperfield. So I saw David Copperfield so many times. We had so many free tickets to go see David Copperfield that we would essentially just give them away because he's definitely been phoning it in for a while. But Matt Franco, for anybody who really, really wants magic.
I love that you mentioned Absinthe because my wife and I saw Absinthe many years ago during it was a couple of years in. So it was like the OG cast, the original Gazillionaire, the original Penny Pivots, Melody Sweets was the Green Fairy, that whole cast. And I remember my wife and I being there and just being blown away at how far they took that show.
Yeah.
And the fact that we only saw like 2 people actually get up and walk out, which was pretty impressive. But Spiegelworld has really done a really good job of coming into Vegas and bringing out these shows. Between Absinthe and Atomic Saloon, which I can't recommend enough. I have a couple of friends that are involved in that production. And again, like just an incredible show. And then the Opium show as well. And then they've got another one that's going to be coming out as well, a 70s disco themed one, I think, that's going into, I want to say, Harrah's or the Link. It's going into one of those properties.
Yeah, I'm not sure. But yeah, Spiegelworld is really coming to Vegas, and they really have their own twist on things, which is amazing. I think they're not putting Cirque du Soleil out of business, but it's definitely more tuned for adults, which I think adults want. Adults want to see a little bit of a more risque Vegas show. And I've seen all 3 of the shows that you were talking about, and they all kind of vary in terms of taste. Like Opium is like over here with sex and like all the innuendos. Atomic Saloon is very, very much a little bit. It was before COVID, and they had this thing with spaghetti, and that kind of grossed me out a little bit. But fantastic show, fantastic show. And then Absinthe is, of course, the OG. But yeah, they're great. They also, I believe, I don't know if they operate the restaurant Super Frico, but they have their performers in there, which I had gone in, and Super Frico's good as a restaurant. It's fine, but it's all about the atmosphere inside of there, which I guess counts kind of like a supper club, kind of like Mayfair or Delilah's, I suppose. But yeah, no, shows are it's tough for these production shows because you have so many residencies coming to town, so they're gonna really have to fight to keep their spots. And I think Spiegelworld's okay.
Let's get off the Strip briefly and momentarily here. I always love when I go to a city, I always love getting local suggestions and some ideas for any kind of locals haunts that I can go and check out. And I've been very fortunate in traveling to Vegas and having friends that are there because they want to get the hell away from the Strip. Mm-hmm. They'll usually take me out to those places. So do you have any kind of suggestions yourself that you would ever put out there for people that maybe want to go and check out a hidden gem or something a little bit different from the big corporate type place?
Yeah, for sure. So there's actually a restaurant. It actually has a couple restaurants in town, but one that I like to recommend is Lindo Muchican, which is actually a Mexican restaurant that has a beautiful view of the Strip. But it's in Henderson. It's on 645 Carnegie Street. I make sure to write it down because there's multiple Lindo Muchicans. I don't want you going to the wrong one. But this one's in Henderson, and it's actually built sort of like on a cliff. And then you actually have a beautiful bar that looks out towards Las Vegas Boulevard. And it's a beautiful local restaurant. They actually make all their tortillas in-house, which is hard to find, especially for somebody from Tucson. I'm very specific about tortillas, but they are great. And they actually have a huge menu, and they're really, really good. So I really recommend Linda Muchican. And that's it's great for families. It's great for like a date, like a casual date, but really enjoy it. So Linda Muchican is fantastic. I'll also recommend one for like sort of the artsy folks, especially like the big cocktail artsy folks. Velveteen Rabbit, which is in the Arts District. The Arts District has really come along, which is the district in between the Las Vegas Strip and Fremont Street. So this is sort of like the in-between area, just sort of north of the Stratosphere. But Velveteen Rabbit is a really popular spot for Las Vegas locals, especially like bartenders, people who consider themselves like foodies or big, like, craft drinkers. Velveteen Rabbit is very, very popular. They actually just opened a speakeasy in Main Street. I can't remember the name of it, unfortunately, but I'm sort of speakeasied out, so I don't know if I'm going to visit it. But the Arts District is great, though. Like, if you go down Main, they have so many restaurants and bars. It's really great for bar hopping, and you find a lot of locals that go down Main Street. So anything on Main Street, they have Rebar, they have Velveteen Rabbit. They also have there's a Mexican restaurant I forgot on that street. Esther's Kitchen is in the Arts District, which is really, really popular for a lot of locals. But yeah, the Arts District really coming along. I'll give you one more. This is for the trendy folks, and that's Mas Por Favor. Mas Por Favor is a taqueria or a taco shop that has a speakeasy in the back. So it's actually in like the most busy parking lot in the entire city, because it's also where they have the Golden Tiki, which is another very, very popular Las Vegas local spot. I'm not big into tiki bars, but it's really, really fun. They also have Frankie's Tiki Bar, which I put gas next to there the other day, and it was popping on a Monday. So again, it's just one of those things. But yeah, so yeah, Mas Por Favor is really cool. It's very trendy for very young people to go and try something different. So Mas Por Favor is definitely on there, and of course Herbs and Rye, which I'm sure you've had on the pod before. Which honestly, I think. Talking about overrated things, I think their food is actually a little bit overrated, but it's discounted. It's half price, so that's why it's properly rated, because it's half price. But drinks are good. But yeah, Herbs and Rye.
Let's talk about those overrated experiences, because I've been burned on this, where you hear about something and it gets built up in your brain and built up in your mind about how great it is and how amazing it is. And you go there and you're like, it was okay, exactly. I guess. Is there anywhere when you were working as a concierge, or even now when you have people asking you if you have suggestions of, they come in and go, I really want to go and try blah, blah, blah place, and I've heard it's such amazing, and you're like,
right.
No.
Yeah, it's tough, because you want to experience some of these things, and that's sort of like the fun part of it, obviously. But one that I always get is Gordon Ramsay's burger restaurant fantastic? And I actually hadn't gone for the longest time. I went probably about a month or two ago, because I said I'd never been. I need to try it. And it didn't knock my socks off. It was one of those things where I feel like it's super blown up about Gordon Ramsay's burger restaurant. He has actually really good restaurants in town, so it's not just a blanket statement. But just that burger on that day, the restaurant didn't feel fancy. It didn't feel like it was built up. And I wasn't a fan of Gordon Ramsay's burger. I always tell people, instead of Gordon Ramsay's burger, go to Holstein's. It's just as good a burger, just without Gordon Ramsay's name on it. And it's around the same price, so it's nothing crazy. But I do have kind of a spicy take for you if you're ready for it. And this might make a lot of people mad, but I think Fremont Street is very overrated. Because I work on Fremont, which is the other funny part about it. But if you ever walk down Fremont Street, just when it's busy, it just smells so bad out there, and it just smells so. The smell is just so off-putting to walk on Fremont. And I don't smoke weed, but you have so much weed smell down there. And then also you have a huge homeless population, which is something that needs to be worked out, obviously. But it just doesn't feel like a place that I want to hang out at. So if you ever watch my stuff on TikTok or Instagram, I don't go to Fremont Street very often, although Fremont Street does have great things inside the hotels. But just outside of Fremont, in the Fremont, under the canopy is what we call it, I don't find it needed for me to go. But again, people want to see the neon. So I always recommend you go down there once so you can see Vegas Vic, and you can see the Golden Nugget and Binion's. And even El Cortez has a beautiful rancho style. And they have one of the only signs in Vegas that still says gambling on the outside. So the thing is, I say it's overrated, but it's definitely worth doing at least once to see all the beautiful neon lights. And if you really like neon lights, you should go see the Neon Museum. It's actually fantastic. But yeah, that's another one. I mean, the ice bars are supremely overpriced to go see the ice bars. They're huge deals. And I have just one more is I actually covered this on the pod, was the Aria Hotel in general is very overrated. Just because it's so hard to walk in anywhere there. It's one of the only restaurants where they won't let people walk in and eat. I've tried to walk into Jean Georges. They reserve the bar tops. It's really hard to walk into Carbone, which is they say one of the best Italian restaurants in the city, which I now have a connect to go in there. So I want to try it one of these days. But yeah, just Aria in general. It's just a very sterilized, not cool. It's cool, but it's not a fun hotel unless you're like Aaron Rodgers or somebody like that gets into the private rooms. I think a very comparable hotel to the Aria is Cosmopolitan. And I think Cosmopolitan is just so much better and cooler than the Aria. But that's my spicy take for today, is the Aria in general.
It's funny that you bring up Gordon Ramsay Burger, because Gordon Ramsay Burger used to be a place that I loved going to, and it was a must eat whenever I'd come to town. And over the last few years, it seems like it's sort of started to drop and a little bit of quality, the service and quality, and it's not as good. You know where they went wrong? Was putting the E in the word
That's
burger.
right. That's exactly.
Used to not have an E in there. It was BURGR. It was burger. As soon as they added the E, all went to
Yeah,
crap
like it
right
just
there.
seems so much cooler back in the day, and then it just felt like, it felt like an Arby's. Okay, that's not true.
Let's not go that far.
It's not an Arby's. But no, it did. It just like the menus didn't feel like high level like a Gordon Ramsay restaurant is. But to his defense, I went to Gordon Ramsay's fish and chips at Caesar's the other day, and I had a fantastic salad. And then I looked over, and some guy had a cheeseburger, and I was really disappointed in my decision that day to get a salad because the burger looked delicious.
If people want to find the podcast, where can they do that, and how can they find you and follow you on social media?
Definitely. So you can actually follow the podcast anywhere that you get your podcasts. So Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, but those are going away, so you can't find it there anymore. So Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can find my social, Brian Ortega _26, or you can follow the Concierge Confidential podcast, which is Concierge Confidential _LV. Or you can follow us on TikTok, which is at Keys to Vegas. And those will have all of our videos that we do when we do our Last Night in Vegas episodes, where you can see where I went and also listen to the full reviews on the pods. And they're very short, usually about a minute for those videos. So they're very, very short.
Excellent, Brian. Thank you so much for jumping on and having the conversation. I really enjoyed this. I definitely will have you back to have more Vegas discussion, and best of luck with the podcast, my friend. It's sounding great, so onward and upward.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This was an awesome experience, and you had asked fantastic questions that I really had to go back and think about these, so really appreciate it.
And that wraps up another episode of Jeff Does Vegas. If you've got feedback on this episode of the show, or any other episode for that matter, or you've got suggestions and ideas for topics you'd like me to cover on the podcast, please feel free to reach out to me via Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at Jeff Does Vegas. Or drop me an email directly at jeff@jeffdoesvegas.com. In the meantime, thank you so much for checking out the show. Be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts so you'll know the moment new episodes are available. And don't forget to visit jeffdoesvegas.com for past episodes and show notes. My name is Jeff, and this has been Jeff Does Vegas, a Walker New Media production.